about limitations, about the relationship between drawing and musical improvisation, kinetic interrogation, and of course, lines.
Being in New York that long and for the majority of your year, is there a way in which your work is about New York? Or is that partly what you're trying to avoid by getting out of the city?
Well, I don't think my work is about New York, but
I mean, would you say that your work is about your daily lived experience?
It's about everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think of the city as much as psychic states or the tempo of events or of life, or communication or miscommunication.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing.
Is the nature of, or like, is the product different in those months that you're away from the city? Like, are your psychic states radically altered?
Well, one thing, when I go out of the city, I often arrange so that I can work outdoors. And I just think that the urgency of the weather and the climate, being in it outside, helps me to work faster. So I think more things come up. It's often more diverse than what I do in the city.
Wow. Even though it seems like the inclination is to think that the city is so stimulating that it's going to jar all this.
Sometimes, but I do notice that there's a different kind of speed that gets injected when I'm able to do some work outside. You
don't work outside in New York, though?
No.
Just because it'd be such a hassle to get up to the park or get somewhere open?
It's not... I can't be alone and work outside in New York. So it's not the same experience. I need a thinking place to work, and I can get that in a place like Wyoming.
Right. What would you sort of say your work is about? I mean, aside from about just your personal experience that goes into it.
It's about the nature of line. Well, it's such a big question. It's about language, and so developing that language so that I can think about other things in the world. Okay, that's vague. So it's about place and dwelling. And so that is a kind of a big idea, which includes being able to work through the relationship between me and other people, ideas around me. Okay, for instance, right now I'm thinking about the environment and the problem of being literal in describing the environment, in describing anything visually.
Like the challenge of it, or you want to avoid literal...
The problem, the problem, not the challenge, but what is the literal line? What is it? And when does it become less literal? When does it become more literal?
Is the concern that if something is overly literal, it becomes one-dimensional, or loses ambiguity, loses richness?
Yeah.
Right.
I think drawing, and when I think about drawing, I do think about line. Line is unique to drawing. It has direction, and it is a direct record of your thought and the movement of your hand, which is your thought, like writing. It's not like painting. It doesn't have that directness. It's not like sculpture.
How is it different than painting? Sorry.
Painting happens with a soft brush.
Okay.
And in that little lag of time, when the brush hits the canvas and it softens and you have to... That's too much of a lag for me.
So you're saying painting doesn't have the directness of
Doesn't
line.
have the directness.
Okay, gotcha.
It also is generally associated with shape and color. There are plenty of painters that work with line, but in general...
even that tiny mediation of the brush. I mean, I like...
For me, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm hearing it almost as like the difference between playing an instrument and singing. Like the instrument is mediating in some way, even if it's very close, it's very direct.
Yeah, it could be something like that.
Whereas singing is just straight of the body. Like if you could just draw with your finger, would you do that? I mean, is that like...
Yeah, sure.
Right. I mean, is that... well,
sure.
Like, is there
sometimes I do.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's also something about working on paper that you don't have to lose the surface when you draw, and so that there is that tension visible if you don't cover the surface. There's always a tension visible between the medium of the drawing medium, the charcoal or graphite or anything, and the paper, which seems so impossibly great, that distance. It feels like a conceptual distance, that's something that can never be bridged. I think about expansive space, could be literal, but also space in the mind, and that kind of longing for this expanse, but also the kind of someone used the word melancholy as Freud's original definition of the word, in that it's a distance. Okay, so
like alienation,
yeah, but not necessarily with sadness. But it's more about the distance. But I like the tinge of sadness in that, and using that word. So there's another artist that used that word in describing this, and I hope I am not misremembering the way she interpreted Freud, because I certainly am not an expert on that. But there is somehow this longing, in that distance. So drawing on paper for me is a kind of merge between diagrammatic, the conceptual and literal, and it has so much. It's so rich in potential there, and sometimes you can just be dancing around all of those. So a problem is that people. One of my problems is one issue for me is I want to work with an organic line. And for many people, they associate an organic line immediately, gutturally, without thinking it through, with a gestural description of nature. And I'm not interested in that. But I'm not interested in the perfectly straight line. And many people have solved that problem by working with straight lines. Agnes Martin dealt with some kind of idea of nature, and it's all very straight horizontal lines. And that was an inspiration to many people. So I can't sustain a straight line. I've tried. And so I have this other line.
What do you mean you can't?
It just... Well, if I do plan to take a line somewhere, it's a disaster, okay? So I just have to follow the line.
Okay.
And, sometimes I've said to myself, just make a grid, damn it. And it just devolves into something else that is much better. So I have to pay attention to that.
Right.
And that's what I'm still excited by it. So that's what I've been engaged with for a long, long time, like over 20 years. So it's interesting for me to try to figure out how that line can work in different kinds of drawing, how I can approach drawing using that kind of a line and do some of that conceptual dance.
I have a bunch of questions, but when you're talking about this internal and external, I mean, is the drawing medium the representation or the actualization of the internal for you, and the paper is the external, and you're talking about bridging the gap?
It can be that.
Between that? Okay.
Right now I have lines that are made of physical dirt. So obviously there's a kind of a bringing the outside to this thing. And I lift that line off, have it on paper or on the wall, and I lift that and I just drop it on the floor. And so I'm just kind of playing around with what that looks like.
But in terms of sort of trying to overcome this melancholy or this distance, bridging this distance, is it this kind of distance between the internal and external?
That's one of the distances. But another one can be, the achievement, the thing that you're reaching toward.
But what is that thing? I mean,
well, it's different in different drawings. Sometimes it is that bigness of space that an empty sheet of paper can evoke. But it's not always that.
You talk. Sorry, go on.
Well, there's a little bit of a parallel with writing on a sheet of paper. You have a character, you have the empty paper, which I know for many writers is very daunting, or composers, I guess. And you put a mark there, and then there's a relationship, and it starts the page, and anticipation, what's going to be there.
Fear, anxiety. Is the empty page exciting to you, or fearful?
I love the empty page. I love it. I love it with one little tiny. I love it before I start. I love it with one tiny mark on it. It's perfect. It's perfect, but it's not mine. It's it's not.
But then the more, is there some equation where the more marks you make, the more you make it yours? I mean, that doesn't.
No, but the
like...
more real of a tangle becomes present, and I think that reflects a little bit more the reality of my own tangle, and so that feels more authentic than just cutting the paper and presenting that as.
What's so perfect about the blank page?
It's just so beautiful. It's limitless. It's free. It's inviting. It's like something you want to take the big dive into.
Do you spend a lot of time leaving it blank? I mean, are you hesitant to mar it?
No, I don't spend a lot of time leaving it blank. I mean, sometimes I'll run my hands over it, just to feel out the space. Not always. But as soon as one mark goes on the paper, then then there's a real something there, and then anything I was thinking about before is suddenly, can't think about that anymore.
Thrown out the window.
Yeah.
What? There's a real something there. What is that something?
Well, there's a tension. There's a relationship.
Okay. That calls for call and response.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the rest of the drawing is that.
Okay.
It's just responding to what's there and what's happening and trying to understand the nature of this relationship and that relationship, and what it calls for.
But if you're the one making all the marks, are you in dialogue with yourself? I mean, or in response to yourself? What's creating the tension?
Well, you know, I'm not smart enough to have a conscious dialogue separate from the making of the drawing. And, you know, I say they're my marks, but they're also a little bit outside of me and can talk to me. So, yeah, I do feel like I'm a little bit of a conduit.
From where? I mean,
from what to what?
Yeah, outside of you. How are there times when they feel more outside of you, less outside of you? How do you, like, is it boring if it just feels like you controlled all the marks? Or do you have that experience ever?
Oh, sure.
And it just feels like it's not activated by some external force or something?
Or I didn't see enough to, respond in a good way, or authentic way, or a new way. I'm not really after newness. I'm more after something authentic. I think it's a mistake to try to do something new.
What does authentic mean? I mean, authentic how?
Well, that you understood a relationship, and that hopefully over time I've understood more and more and more, and so I see more than I used to, and so I'm better able to respond to the potential of this thing. Very vague.
Let's get back for a sec to where you feel like these marks are coming from, if not directly from you. How you perceive of them. Let's get back to what you were saying a moment ago.
Well, I don't want to sound too new agey about this thing that's sending me something and I'm transmitting it onto the paper. But I do feel like I'm part of the big world, and which is much more important than me, and I should somehow be able to extract things from that world. And it's everything. So I know you want me to give you some specific examples.
Well, like today, what were you working on today? And are there particular things coming through you, or particular emotional states that you access, or thoughts, or what are you thinking about when you work?
Well, I would say thoughts and psychological states rather than emotional states. Emotional states is very narrow, and psychological states just covers a lot more of what's internal. Well, let's talk about yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So yesterday I had this line made of earth that was on my wall, or my drawing table, and then I took it outside and I was photographing it, just thrown on some grass. Just to see if there was anything that looked active there, or, when I draw, I feel like I'm sending the line out. So this was literally kind of like sending it, tossing it onto these tall grasses, just to see if it was going to take me somewhere, if I could see some relationship between something, and mostly not. And then I took it to the side of the outside studio, which is made of this kind of very ugly, vinyl siding, two-tone vinyl siding. But the line was the same color as the brown tone. And so it was kind of funny to put it on there. And then I kind of curled it around so it looked like a letter. Looked like a character, a sign for something. It also, besides it being made of dirt, it's made of something else too, but for some reason I don't want to give that away. So it's made of those two things, and somehow it also looks like iron, a piece of iron. And if I put it on that piece of vinyl siding, the vinyl siding has ridges, so it doesn't lie super flat. It lifts off. And so that was kind of funny to see this thing that looked like the side of a building and this thing that lifted off that was a symbol. And that's as far as I got, because it isn't really anything yet. But it helped me think about that. And then I went inside, and I was just a little distraught about all these these little weird tangents I was doing outside, and just wanted to fix myself in place. And I kind of smudged a piece of paper and then fixed that line with dirt on it right smack in the center, in the most obvious central uncomposed way. Well, composed in that it was central, but not creating space in my other way. So, and that was kind of like my period for the day.
I mean, there's sounds. You're really describing like a lot of physical processes and almost like an improvisational process, right? Like, is there sort of a kinetic interrogative process that you go through, and it's less about like, what am I thinking about right now?
Well, I like that you put kinetic and interrogative in the same sentence, because I do think that they belong together. Not interrogative in the sense of thinking through a logic, but in this other sense where you react, you in motion react, and yeah.
I mean, what's your relationship or conscious relationship to improvisation or pure intuition, or are you actively fostering those practices?
Yeah, sure.
Where does that come from for you?
I suppose that, the musical improvisation is like that's a great achievement. It's gathering all your resources, and working in the most fluid way possible. Plus, you're producing music, which is the most direct emotional contact to another person. So that motivation, that same motivation is there.
Right.
But the improvisational, where does that practice come from? I think that I'm naturally, there's some kind of disorganization about me. And I learned to harness that. Which is, that gives improvisation a bad name. I don't mean that. And I should back up, because I've learned to trust the intuitive over time. I think that what we do when we go through our early training is that we try to build up our intuition so that we can act in a free way. And I was encouraged to do this, and it was when I really started to trust that more, that was uncomfortable, but I've gotten to trust it over time. It really is an act of faith, that this is not entirely about improvisation, but there's something in the non-representational nature of this work that where it feels like in the beginning of a drawing that I have no bearing. And I have to trust that. That's different from musical improvisation. Music,
not necessarily.
No. It seems to me music, to do that with music, you have to have such a strong understanding of structure and
But theory. You don't think that's the same as with, I think that
there's much more underlying structure in most musical improv than in this kind of drawing, in this kind of art making. Well, okay, if you work within the scale system, in improv, you might not, of course. You might work with any kind of sound. It's just that the language seems much more limited.
Yeah, I mean, if you're working with a circumscribed set of things, I mean,
which has this great potential then, because then you can work with that and really push it in amazing ways. Sometimes when there's so much freedom,
absolutely. I mean, limitations define the structure and how far you can take something. I mean, do you consciously apply like a set of limitations to a drawing as it's unfolding in order to give it that structural shape?
Sometimes, and then they change, but I think I don't do it. I must do it, but you
don't articulate it necessarily.
I don't start with it like many artists do and many abstract drawers do.
Right, like I'm only going to use curly lines or something like that, or
or
set of rules.
Some set of rules, but that allowing something to happen freely when it's not quite as time constrained as a musical piece. Mm-hmm. So that it can really, really slow down, and that slowing down can be a time when you overly compose, or it can be a time when everything just is out of your head and there's just nothing.
Is that the good time? You're saying?
I think that's better, but it can feel so long and slogging. But I think that my work is that tension between conscious composing and that freeing up, that freedom.
Like, is a successful piece for you one where the rules, conscious or unconsciously evolved, are sort of immediately graspable to a viewer or to you, or the opposite, where like there's something that you have to keep searching in order to try and access this logic that may not even be accessible?
I don't think it's so obvious to the viewer.
The set of rules.
I wouldn't ever call what I do what I do as having a set of rules.
Right. But by nature, like the finished form is it is I don't know, it's a defined object, right?
I mean, it's something on a piece of paper and it's out there. Because I stopped working on it.
Right. Well,
I have a reason for having finished it, but but I don't think it's a clear set of rules. I used to say I stopped the drawing when every line has a job, is doing something. That was just a way to say something about the fact that I looked very hard to make sure to be responsible for everything I put there, even though it might have come out in a more easy way. It's my work isn't fast gestural drawing, and I think that is not understood by some viewers at first. That it looks like a kind of a fluid gesture of the body, and it's recording this gesture, and that's part of what it's about. But it's not. It's very, very slowly drawn. There's a lot of time between marks.
Like how long? I mean, could there be an hour or two between marks?
Oh, there could be, sure. And then sometimes it could be, 15 seconds or a minute or 30 minutes. But it's not repetitive.
What makes a piece more successful or less successful? If it's not necessarily the expression of the internal logic of the piece.
Well, I do think that there's an internal logic. I just don't think that there's a set of rules.
Okay.
I couldn't ever say what that is.
But
But there is a logic, and it doesn't come about in a steady way. It becomes apparent. I think I'm in the middle of a drawing, and all of a sudden I'm at the end of the drawing. So I guess some kind of a logic has to become apparent, to me, and hopefully to others. I usually feel it should be open enough to lead to something else. It doesn't want to feel contained or complete in that way, in a contained way.
Right, I mean, is even just using the word logic, is that almost like a dirty word?
No.
Inherent logic? Okay.
No, that isn't a dirty word. As long as we don't link it to verbal logic.
Right, or to like statistical logic or linearity. You can have non-linear logic is what you're saying. Right.
Left brain logic.
Okay. To what degree does communicating that factor into the success, or even just what are you hoping that somebody else might get from the work?
Well, I hope that I can put the work out there and I can get a response and I can learn a little bit more. I hope I hope I can expand the idea of what line means or does. But I'm not... I don't know that I'm so attached to what I was trying to express. So it's like a baby. You put it out there in the world. It has its own life. It has its own relationships.
You want it to have those. You're saying you want it to have those.
Yeah.
Not everybody views their baby that way.
Well, it's probably good parenting. Right? I don't know. This is the only kind of parenting I've done, so I can't say.
What keeps you coming back to the work, or?
Well, it's a way for me to be present. For some people that might sound strange because it seems like you're stepping out of the world, but I feel like I'm stepping in. And I like that world, as awful as some of the drawings can be, and parts of the drawings, an artist told me a long time ago, or told a bunch of us a long time ago, secretly you have to love it, and secretly and openly I love it.
Why secretly? Because that sounds sort of narcissistic to love the work.
I think what she was trying to say to us is that even when the work is going poorly, if you don't have that secret love, that you might not want to tell others that you love your painting or
secret love for your own work,
for your own work at that time, because it's also kind of awful at that point. You have to, you want to acknowledge that you secretly love it and cultivate that. But there's a language that I feel like I developed that I can really use, and so I go there, and that's the way for me to think about the world and see the world, and I use it.
Does it just feel awesome to draw?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very cool.
I'm just thinking, sometimes when I come back to the saxophone, which is like my main instrument, which I don't play very often, but I'm all of a sudden like, oh, this feels good. Like I can say what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And I can't say everything that I'm
Right.
thinking. There's a frustration there.
Right.
But it's like the pleasant frustration of like flossing your teeth.
Well, you have different languages.
Right.
And I suppose maybe we all do, not just art. We do other things besides art,
Right.
But you specifically have several different art languages, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and you know, they feel to varying degrees of comfort, and sometimes I seek out that discomfort. I mean, I think there's a reason. One of the reasons I don't play the saxophone as much as I used to, and you know, maybe as much as I could, is I enjoy the challenge. I mean, I'm learning this about myself. I think I enjoy like the beginner's curve. There's like a really exciting burst of learning. You know,
it's so great to be a beginner.
Yeah. I mean, I really think it's really valuable for anybody, but especially artists, to always have some little beginner thing going on the side.
Absolutely, but also to feel like a beginner when you start anything.
Even when you start a new drawing,
right,
that you've been doing for however many years, the same technique or something. Yeah. I mean, it's super important, I think, to keep that perspective. It can be easy for me to go to the saxophone and not, you know, forget that beginner's mind and then be frustrated that I can't do everything I want and almost be like annoyed at myself or annoyed at the instrument or whatever. And I think you're right that like if I were to approach it with a more of like, this is the first time I'm doing this, whatever this might be on the saxophone, you're better off.
But also music is the least familiar language.
For me, it certainly is. Yeah.
That we grow up with. Like we need special training.
Right.
For music.
Well, some people
to enter the conversation, let's say.
Right. I mean, some people come to it immediately. That, you know, they've been steeped in it since they were born or whatever, and it's natural to them. That was
maybe a little bit more natural, but not nearly as natural as speech. And
right.
And okay, so it could be, as for those people, that could be more comfortable than some kind of an visual art language.
Right.
But I still think that the technical side of music playing it's more rarefied. It's more.
Right. But I mean, no more rarefied than visual art. You know, I mean, did you? What was your relationship? Did your relationship to visual art start very young?
It did start very young, but we're used to seeing and distinguishing, even if we don't speak to each other in that language, you know. So it's that, there's something more natural in people.
No, for sure. I mean, visual things and verbal things both occur in the practical.
Right.
They have a practical function and a utilitarian function and an abstract function. Whereas music only essentially has an abstract function, even you know, if let's call like a song an abstract function, right? Or like a non-utilitarian function. So I think you're right in that sense, but there's still but making images is still different, and it requires a technical ability that you. I mean, it sounds like you trained into your body fairly early. Do you have a really steady and regular art practice? Regular.
It can be erratic over the week, but, you know, depending on which times I can get there. But I've worked, you know, very different schedules. And if I had the time, when I don't have other commitments, I can easily be in the studio from 9 in the morning till 10 at night.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, not all of that time is making marks. A lot of it is just like sitting and looking but
and you're happy doing that.
On the balance. Yeah, definitely.
When you go to the studio, do you generally have like a set of tasks that you have to complete for a show or something like that? Or how much just open time do you have, and how many like just open question marks are you playing with at any given time?
I often have time when I'm not working toward a show. I like that time better than when I am working toward a show. I think I get better work done.
Just less pressure?
Less pressure. That spontaneous thing can happen better, I think. So I usually have a lot of pieces going at once. I like working big, but I usually have a number of big works and some small works going on at the same time. And things arise as I'm working, ideas arise, so, then I might stop and work a little on this new idea and put it away and then bring it out much later.
Do you view the process as like a I'm just going to work thing, or is it and this is just what you do, or is there some kind of intensity that you're trying to engage on like a day-to-day basis?
Both. I think it's I don't want to glorify making art, I think it's a way I can feel creative. I think that's really important, but people are really creative teachers and doctors and, can be really interesting thinkers and lay pipe in the street. So I don't want to glorify having an artist's life. Maybe I do.
You're being a little bit excessively humble or downplaying the process.
I think there's so much ego that can be attached to that life, and it really is kind of icky. And,
So you want to avoid. I mean, how do you avoid that? How do you exorcise the ego from your own practice? And
making bad work can be really humbling, so that can be good.
How often do you throw away a painting? I mean, a drawing.
I don't throw away a lot of pieces of paper. I put them away and I work on them again. I throw away some. I should probably throw away more. Just get them out.
Do you have like a huge file of stuff that needs more work?
Yeah. I have rolls and rolls of things that need more work and drawers full of things that need more work.
Do you mark it really clearly, like, this is,
I put them in folders that say, yes, need more work, and then I take them out and I look at everything and it all gets mixed up, and then it's terribly confusing and I can't always remember what I think is finished. Usually I can, but sometimes I'll see something that I thought was finished and think, that should become something else.
What about something once you've already sold it and you see it again? Have you ever felt like, that needs more work?
Occasionally, but usually I think I decide that is, that work went out and it did this, and then the next phase of work did something else. Some really nice shifts have happened when I've just decided to stop drawing, and before I know it, I'm drawing somehow.
So you've actively said, like, I'm gonna either, is it take time off, or I'm gonna use a different medium or a different process?
Well, there's one story I tell. I was at a residency and I was just gotten there and I was so tired of drawing. I said, I am not going to draw. And this has to do with the idea of dwelling. It's been running through my work for a long time. And so I just thought, I'm going to build a house for myself and I'm going to, draw architectural plans, and that'll be really fun. So I think about the room I was in, which was 500 square feet, and I thought, well, I might have enough money to build a 500 square foot house. So why don't I just go to the hardware store and buy some blue tape, and I'll just mark it out, the blueprint, life size on the wall. Just put the line for the loft here, and the doorway here, and the window there, And so I started to do that, and then the lines quickly went awry. And then I knew that I could still live in my drawing, and then the idea for a practical solution to this problem of dwelling just faded for that.
So you could live inside of the drawing?
Yeah.
Like make a three-dimensional drawing? And
No, that I could live psychically in my drawing. So that it could provide for me what that... So this is how I understood it, that this urge to build the real structure, practical structure would provide, it needed to provide something for me, but the drawing could, I got back into the drawing, and the drawing answered that need.
Why do you think it is that so much of what you're looking for is place? I mean, where is that coming from? Do you feel displaced, or did you feel displaced, or what does that mean to you?
Well, there are a lot of times when I didn't quite fit, the feeling of not fitting in when you're growing up. Or, I grew up in a Mennonite family in a very Jewish community. I was born in Switzerland, and then I moved when I was very young, to the Philadelphia suburbs. But I had connections to place in the West, because that's where my extended family was. And so I had these different feelings about place. And I was also a very quiet and interior child. So, my sense of being not in the place necessarily where other people were, but in my own place, and sort of trying to figure that out.
Did you relate to the Mennonite upbringing also? Or did you feel
I think in some ways I did, not ways that were obvious. Like, I don't think I related to the doctrine. I related to some of the cultural things. I think that, my kind of respect for farming communities definitely came out of that. I could see the sense of displacement in my parents.
Like they were displaced?
Or they were displaced, and also figuring out their own new place. And so I was kind of aware of that. And the idea of artists always kind of looking to find a place that society doesn't provide for them. And New York is great for that, because most of New York is made of people that weren't born there, that moved there. Yeah. So they're displaced and sort of finding this.
It's amazing at being home to anyone. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not a freak in New York.
No.
And that was a great reason to stay.
Do you feel like you have succeeded in making a home for yourself with your work or through your work?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it gave me a language. And I really feel like I'm in it. I can be in it. Does it give me, does it provide an adequate, physical space for me to be in that I think I need? No, unless I start sewing tents, which I've thought about, or actually building structures. And I do think in another life I would have been an architect, and I would love to figure out how to work with an architect to, make some dimensional manifestation of this thing that I'm doing. I get a lot of good response from architects who seem to understand, what they see in the drawing. Is it buildable? Can I live out my dotage in one of these things, in something I create? Well, I don't know. That weirdly is something I think about more and more.
You've been listening to my conversation with artist Christine Hebert on the Make Work podcast for The Rumpus. If you happen to be in Houston